The scent of money and danger smelled exactly the same in rooms like this. Expensive cologne, layered over something colder, something that had no name, but that Josephine Kress had learned to recognize the way some people learned, to recognize weather changes in their knees. She had worked the books at Sable and Crown for 4 years. Not the front-of-house books, not the menus and the reservations and the cellar inventory that the restaurant manager, a nervous man named Jeffrey Platt, showed to the tax office every spring. The other books, the ones kept in a locked drawer in the back office, written in a shorthand that Josephine had developed herself, numbers moving between columns the way water moved between hands. Present, then not, then present again somewhere else entirely. Nobody paid attention to Josephine. That was the point. That had always been the point. She was 31 years old, wore cardigans in muted colors, kept her dark hair in a bun that was neither stylish nor untidy. Just practical, just forgettable. She was, in the language of the men who moved through Sable and Crown, like they owned the air inside it. Not worth looking at twice. She was soft in the places that the women on their arms were not soft. She filled her chairs differently. She ordered her lunch from the staff kitchen and ate it at her desk, and did not join the servers for cigarettes behind the loading dock. She was, in every way that mattered to those men, invisible. She had spent years being furious about it. Then she had spent a few more years deciding to use it. Sable and Crown occupied the ground floor of a converted heritage building on St. Denis Street in Montreal, close enough to the financial district to attract men in suits, far enough from it to feel private. The dining room had pressed tin ceilings and leather banquettes, and lighting so carefully considered that everyone looked a little beautiful, a little dangerous. The kitchen produced food that Josephine privately thought was excellent, though she rarely said so. Complimenting the food felt like complimenting the wallpaper in a house where something was rotting underneath the floors. She knew what was rotting. She knew exactly. The reservation under the name Aurelian Holdings had been in the system for 2 weeks. A corner booth, the one near the fire exit that had a partial view of 3 other tables and both entrances. Josephine had noticed the name when she was cross-referencing a payment against the ledger. Noticed it the way she noticed everything, quietly, completely, filing it away behind her expression without changing anything about her face. Aurelian Holdings was a shell. She knew that, because she had spent the better part of 18 months tracking where certain deposits went after they left the accounts she managed, and they went through Aurelian Holdings on their way to somewhere else. But the name on the reservation attached to it, the actual human being who had booked the corner booth for 8 o'clock on a Thursday evening in November, that name she had not expected. She had not expected it to be Rowan Ashcroft. Rowan Ashcroft arrived at 7:53, which Josephine noted, because she was at that moment carrying a clipboard through the dining room under the pretense of checking table settings, which was not her job but was something she had trained herself to do on certain evenings, without anyone remarking on it. He was taller than she had imagined. She had imagined him, once or twice, from the shape his signature left in the accounts. Decisive, minimal, not a single unnecessary stroke. In person, he confirmed that impression exactly. He was the kind of man who did not walk into rooms so much as arrive in them. He wore a dark suit, no tie, and his jaw had the look of someone who had decided a long time ago that he was not going to apologize for being exactly what he was. His hair was dark, going silver at the temples. He moved like someone who had never in his life felt the particular anxiety of wondering whether he was welcome. Josephine hated that she noticed how good-looking he was, because it was the kind of detail that felt embarrassing to admit even to oneself, and also because it was beside the point, and also because she noticed it anyway. He was accompanied by 2 men she didn't know and a woman she did. The woman's name was Claudette Renner. She was 34, blonde, worked ostensibly as a private events coordinator, and had been Rowan Ashcroft's partner for approximately 14 months, based on when Josephine had first noticed the secondary account that paid for a second set of living expenses. A downtown condo registered in Claudette's name, car insurance, a gym membership, a recurring charge from a florist on Laurier Avenue. Men like Ashcroft were not subtle about providing for the women in their lives. They simply moved money and assumed no one was paying close enough attention to follow it. Josephine had been paying attention. She returned to her office, sat down, opened the ledger to the page she had been working on before the reservation had snagged in her mind like a pulled thread. She told herself it was not her business. She told herself this several times, with some conviction, over the next 20 minutes. Then Jeffrey Platt knocked on her office door and asked her, with the slightly desperate energy he always had when he was nervous, if she could take the receipts from table 14 out to the dining room, because Sasha had called in sick, and they were short, and it would only take a moment. Table 14 was 2 tables away from the corner booth. Josephine took the receipts. She moved through the dining room the way she always did. Without hurry, without drama, head slightly angled toward the clipboard she still carried as though she were consulting it. She set the receipt folder on table 14. She did not look directly at the corner booth. She listened. 4 years of eating lunch alone at her desk and keeping her mouth shut and being the kind of person that no one bothered to lower their voice around had given Josephine a very particular skill. She could pass conversations from ambient noise the way a musician could pick out a single instrument in a full orchestra. She did not even have to concentrate anymore. Her ears simply sorted what she sorted. In the 43 seconds it took her to set down the receipt folder and straighten 2 glasses that did not need straightening was this. The 2 men she didn't know were not Ashcroft's associates. They were his lawyers, or they were presenting themselves as his lawyers. And the distinction mattered because the thing they were describing, a transfer, a timeline, a window that closed at midnight on Friday, had the particular careful language of people who had rehearsed what they were going to say, rather than simply saying it. And Claudette, who was sitting to Ashcroft's left with her hand resting near his on the tablecloth, said almost nothing. She was watching the 2 men speak. Her face was doing the thing that faces do when they are working very hard to appear natural and are not entirely succeeding. Josephine had seen that face before. She had seen it in the mirror once, early in her time at Sable and Crown, before she got better at keeping her expressions out of her face entirely. It was the face of someone who already knew how the conversation was going to end. She went back to her office. She sat in her chair for a long time without turning on the desk lamp. The numbers she had been tracking for the past 6 weeks began to arrange themselves in her mind differently. Same numbers, different shape. The transfers out of the operational account. The timing, the secondary routing she had flagged as irregular and then unflagged because she hadn't been able to find where the irregularity was going. Now she thought she knew where it was going. Claudette Renner had been funneling money. Slowly, in small amounts, over what Josephine now calculated was approximately 5 months. Not enough to trigger the internal checks that Josephine ran quarterly. She was the internal checks, and she had missed it, and she did not forgive herself for that easily. But enough. Enough to make a payment. Enough to settle a debt, or collect one. Josephine thought about who might want Rowan Ashcroft's timeline and his location on a Thursday evening in November. She thought about the transfers out of Aurelian Holdings that had always terminated before she could follow them to their endpoint. She thought about the fact that there were 2 men at that table who were not lawyers, and that Claudette had known how the conversation was going to end before it started. She thought, if he leaves this building through the main entrance, he will not be safe. She thought, this is not my business, she thought. I have the books. I have everything. I have 6 weeks of numbers that tell a story that he does not know is being told about him. She pulled a notepad toward her, tore off a single sheet, wrote 4 sentences in her clearest, smallest handwriting. Then she sat there and had a brief and extremely unpleasant argument with herself. The argument went roughly like this. She owed Rowan Ashcroft nothing. He was a man who moved money through channels that would not survive scrutiny, who had employed her to be invisible, who had never once, as far as she was aware, thought about her at all. He was not a good man. She had no illusions about what the accounts she managed were connected to. She had made her peace with that, or something like peace, on the grounds that what she didn't confirm she didn't have to carry, and that the alternative, unemployment in a field where word of mouth was everything, had seemed, at 27, like the worse option. She was not 27 anymore. On the other hand, there were 2 men at that table who were not lawyers, and Claudette Renner had been quietly and methodically building a case for something that Josephine could not fully name but could feel in the way she felt errors in a column of numbers. A wrongness, a thing that did not add up, a place where the equation broke. She thought about being invisible. She thought about how she had spent years being furious about it, and then years deciding to use it. She folded the piece of paper. She walked back out to the dining room. She chose the moment carefully. Ashcroft was looking down at his phone. Something had come in, something that put a slight tension in his jaw that she wouldn't have noticed if she hadn't been watching for exactly that kind of thing. The 2 men across from him were talking to each other in low voices. Claudette was looking toward the far end of the room. Josephine walked past the table on her way to the service station. She set a fresh water glass on the edge of the table without breaking stride. It was a plausible thing to do, a waitress-adjacent thing. Nobody looked at her, and as she did it, she placed the folded note underneath the glass, flat against the tablecloth where only the person she intended would see it. She did not stop. She did not look at him. She walked to the service station and stood there with her back to the room, arranging napkins that did not need arranging, and she counted her own heartbeats, which she had never needed to do before, and which were considerably less calm than she would have preferred. Behind her, she heard the faint sound of paper unfolding. Then silence, the particular charged silence of something becoming understood. Then his voice, low, controlled, addressed to the 2 men across from him. "Gentlemen, I think we're done for the evening." She was back in her office with the door closed, and the lamp on, and the ledger open in front of her when the knock came. Not Jeffrey's knock, which was hesitant and slightly apologetic. This was 2 knocks, evenly spaced, with the measured authority of someone who had decided exactly how hard to knock, and then knocked that hard and no harder. She said, "Come in," and was proud of how level her voice was. Rowan Ashcroft came in. He was alone. He took up more of the small office than she had mentally prepared for, and he looked at her for a long moment without saying anything, and she looked back at him with the expression she had spent 4 years perfecting, present, attentive, giving away nothing. "You left something at my table," he said. "I updated the water service," she said. He looked at her. She had the sense that he was doing the same thing she did, sorting, filing, building a picture from details that other people didn't collect. "You work the accounts," he said. It wasn't a question. "I work the accounts," she confirmed. He pulled the chair from the corner of her office, the one where she put her coat, and sat in it. This was also a decisive thing, she thought. He sat where he chose, without asking, without the performance of asking. "Tell me what you know," he said. So she told him. She opened the ledger to the flagged pages. She walked him through the transfers, the timing, the routing pattern she had tracked, and lost, and retracked. She showed him the secondary account she had connected to Claudette Renner's name. She explained the things she had not been able to explain until 40 minutes ago, when she had sat in her office with the lamp off and watched the numbers take a different shape. She realized, somewhere in the middle of it, not nervous. She was the opposite of nervous. She was perfectly calm, in the way that she was always calm when she was working with numbers. When the story they were telling was clarifying itself, and all she had to do was follow it. This was the same. This was just a different kind of accounting. He did not interrupt her. He listened the way intelligent people listened, completely, without performing attentiveness. His eyes on her face, and then on the pages she indicated, and then on her face again. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been tracking this?" he said. 6 weeks for the routing pattern, she said. "I didn't know what I was looking at until tonight. What changed tonight? I heard your table." Another silence. Longer. "You heard us. I was delivering receipts to table 14, she said. "I wasn't eavesdropping. I simply heard." "You simply heard," he repeated, and there was something in his voice she couldn't quite classify, something between assessment and something else. "And then you wrote me a note." "I wrote 4 sentences, she said. "I thought that was the appropriate amount." Something shifted in his expression, not a smile, exactly. Something in the same family as a smile, something that lived near it. 4 sentences, he said. "You were precise about it. I'm precise about most things." He looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said. "That's why you're still here after 4 years, when other people in your position have lasted considerably less time." She hadn't known that he knew that. She hadn't known that he had thought about her position at all. The realization moved through her strangely, somewhere below the professionalism she was holding very carefully in place. "The men at your table," she said, bringing it back. "They weren't." "No," he said. "They were not. And Claudette is being managed," he said, and the word managed arrived with a flatness that closed that particular subject entirely. She nodded. She looked at the ledger. She thought about saying something more and decided against it. "Josephine," he said. She looked up. "How long have you been invisible in this building?" The question arrived sideways, not quite what she had expected, and she felt something tighten briefly in her chest before she could prevent it. "Long enough," she said. He leaned forward slightly. "It was a skill," he said. "What you did tonight. You used your position, your access, your presence in that room that no one was tracking, to gather information that I needed, and then you delivered it without exposing yourself, without disrupting the room, without giving anything away. That is not a passive thing." He paused. "I want to make sure you understand that I understand that." She didn't say anything. She wasn't sure she had words for what it felt like to have someone name the thing she had spent years doing, the thing she had done on purpose, the thing that had felt for a long time like a consolation prize for the other thing. The being looked past, the not mattering, the taking up space in a room without registering in it, to have it named as a skill rather than a symptom. "Thank you," she said finally, because that was the honest thing. "No," he said. "Thank you." He came back the following Tuesday with a different knock. Still measured, still deliberate, but somehow less formal, as though a small adjustment had been made in his internal calibration. He sat in the same chair. He put a folder on her desk. "I'd like you to look at something," he said. She looked at the folder, then at him. "This isn't the Sable and Crown accounts." "No," he said. She opened the folder, scanned the first page, flipped it to the second. Her mind was already running, already sorting, already finding the places where the numbers were doing something interesting. "This is going to take a few days," she said. "I know, and you trust me with this." He looked at her steadily. "You gave me back 4 sentences when you could have given me nothing," he said. "Yes, I trust you with this." She closed the folder and set her hands flat on top of it. She thought about the question she was going to ask, and how to ask it, and then decided to ask it plainly because she had not survived 4 years at Sable and Crown by being indirect. "What am I actually doing here, Ashcroft? In this building, going forward? What are we talking about?" He was quiet for a moment. "I'm talking about a position that uses the thing you're actually good at," he said. rather than the smaller version of it you've been running in this room. And the visibility question, she said. I've been invisible here for a reason. I know, he said. I'm offering you the option to make a different choice. She looked at him across her small desk, with its lamp and its ledger and its 4 years of careful, invisible work. She thought about what it felt like to watch someone read a note she had written and understand it immediately, completely, without her having to explain a single word. She thought about what it felt like to have someone sit down across from her and say the word skill. I'll need access to the full routing records, she said. You'll have them by tomorrow morning. And I'll need you to understand that I'm going to find everything, she said. Not just what you're expecting me to find. Everything. He didn't look away. I'm counting on it, he said. She pulled the folder toward her, opened it to page 1. Come back Thursday, she said. I'll have the first layer done by then. He stood, straightened his jacket, moved toward the door, and she was looking at the page in front of her and not at him, which was fine, which was professional, which was the appropriate response. At the door, he stopped. For the record, he said, and she looked up. 4 sentences was exactly the right amount. She said nothing, but she allowed herself, alone at her desk in the small lit room, with the ledger open and the folder waiting, and 4 years of careful invisibility quietly folding itself into something else. She allowed herself a smile, which was also exactly the right amount. 3 weeks later, she walked into a room that was not a back office on St. Denis Street. It was the 42nd floor of a tower in the financial district, glass on 3 sides. Montreal laid out below in its winter geometry. The mountain to the north, the river to the south, lights coming on in the grey 4:30 dusk. The room had a long table and 8 people around it, who were all, in various ways, more powerful than anyone Josephine had ever shared a room with, and who all, in various ways, turned to look at her when she walked in. She was wearing a dark blazer and her hair was down, which was not its default, and she was carrying the folder that contained 6 weeks of her best work, and she was aware of the specific quality of attention being directed at her, which was the kind of attention that assesses, that measures, that decides whether you are going to matter. Ashcroft was at the head of the table. He did not introduce her with a preamble. He said, "This is Josephine Kress. She's going to tell you what she found." And Josephine set the folder down and opened it and began to speak. She did not rush. She did not apologize for the complexity of what she was explaining or pause to check whether people were following. She simply laid it out. The accounts, the routing, the pattern, the thing that had been moved and where it had been moved to, and what that meant, and what it meant about the people in this room who thought they had been careful enough. 2 of the 8 people at the table had not been careful enough. She had found them. She named them. She laid the documentation in front of them without flinching and let the numbers speak, because numbers in her experience were the clearest language, and she had always been fluent. The room was very quiet afterward. Rowan Ashcroft looked at the 2 men across the table from her and said 3 words that she would not repeat, not because she was squeamish, but because they were not hers to repeat. They were his. She simply noted them, filed them, understood what they meant. Then he looked at her, and the assessment in his expression had been replaced by something that was not assessment, something that was steadier and more specific than that. And he said, "To the room in general, and to no one in particular, we're done here." She went back to St. Denis Street that evening, packed the contents of her desk into a single box, which did not take long because she had always been minimal about personal effects in professional spaces. The ledger she carried separately because it was not hers. It belonged to the building, to the accounting, to the 4 years she was leaving behind, and she set it on the desk and stood there for a moment looking at it. 4 years of being invisible, of having the kind of access that no one bothered to protect, because no one thought she could do anything with it, of building a skill that she had never once been asked to name. She thought about Ashcroft saying, "I want to make sure you understand that. I understand that." She turned off the lamp and picked up her box. Jeffrey Platt was standing in the hallway, looking anxious, which was his natural state. "Josephine," he said. "Are you? Is everything? Everything's fine, Jeffrey," she said. "I'll send you the Q4 projections before the 15th. The new format is in the shared drive." He blinked. "Right," he said. "Of course. Thank you." She walked out through the dining room, which was filling up with the Thursday evening crowd, the usual architecture of wealth and ambition, and carefully maintained surfaces, the pressed-in ceiling catching the light the way it always did, beautiful and cold and faintly deceptive. She had spent 4 years eating lunch at her desk in a room behind this room. She walked through it without stopping, without looking back, box under her arm, and pushed through the front door into the cold Montreal November, where the street was wet, and the lights of the city were beginning to make their reflections in the puddles on the sidewalk, bright and shifting, nothing like fixed. Her phone buzzed, a message from a number she now had saved. Thursday went well. Friday, 9 a.m. "The address I sent you this morning." She read it once, put her phone in her pocket, started walking toward the metro. The woman who had spent 4 years being invisible in that building was gone, left behind somewhere in the dining room with the pressed-in ceiling and the carefully considered lighting. The woman walking up St. Denis Street in the November dark carried a box with everything she needed and knew exactly where she was going. And if the city didn't know her name yet, it was only a matter of time.